Does your podcast tell a story? If so, what does the story look like? If not, why not? It is time for Build That Podcast, where we will discuss how you can use a podcast to grow your business and expand your influence. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford. Let me encourage you to sign up for the 200 words to move you forward with marketing and podcasting, delivered right to your inbox each Tuesday. Sign up for it at buildthatpodcast.com/the 200. I'll also put it in the show notes. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Today, we're going to look at narrative and the narrative flow of your podcast. So your podcast should tell a story because stories resonate with people, and it's easier for people to follow along. Listeners remember stories much better and far longer than simple facts and figures. As the host, you get to decide the flow of the conversation, which is why it's important to think through your questions and their order to shape the narrative. So think of your podcast using this timeline. This is one I often use and sort of the flow I use. It's intro, background, product, problem, experience, challenges, example stories, summary, closing. If that sounds overwhelming, don't worry. I'm going to break each one out, and it's not as complicated as it sounds. You probably have already heard a story or a podcast using this style of narrative. So let's begin. First with the intro. The intro is just that. You tell the audience who you are and who your guest is. It's not complicated. So don't spend a lot of time here because you're simply setting the stage, right? It's that introductory shot in the movie or the first chapter in the book where you learn who the characters are. The second part after the intro is background. This would be any questions that lead up to what the guest is doing today for the reason they're on your show. So I give the guests some flexibility in how they answer, but I intentionally lead them towards the next question. So quick warning. Tell me about yourself is too broad and open-ended. You want to narrow it down so they have a guideline for where to go. Instead of asking, tell me about yourself or tell me about your background, use something like, what motivated you to start your business? Something a little narrower. Okay, after intro and background comes product. And what I mean by product, it's simply the reason I wanted them on the show. It could be their product. It could be a podcast. It could be a book they've written or, a service or content or business specialty. I did this recently on a couple of podcasts. The podcast was a secondary function of the guest's overall job and content category. So I spent some time talking about their specialty and how they did that and why it was important. So intro, background, product, then comes problem. Problem addresses, the problem that they're solving with their specialty or their product or their service. Sometimes this gets answered in the background or product section, and that's okay. If they've already answered it, you can move on to the next question, or you can have them elaborate on it, even if they've mentioned it before. I've been a big fan of Donald Miller's Building a StoryBrand model for years. Fascinating book and model for marketing. And he talks about problems on a couple of different levels. First, there's the physical or outward problem. For example, when your pipes leak and flood the floor beneath it, that's a physical problem, right? You have water where it's not supposed to be. So the inward or emotional problem is another problem you experience, and it's how the outward problem makes you feel. So in the previous leak instance, this makes you feel frustrated, scared, angry, overwhelmed. This laundry list of different emotions. You want to think through both of those problems as you're asking them to elaborate. And if you're not familiar with the book, Building a StoryBrand, I'll drop it in the show notes. It's definitely worth a read. So after problem comes experience. Now, experience questions, those are related to their experience in their specialty and with their product, and they show how the guest is solving the problem that they just discussed. And this can blend in a little bit with challenges. So I said experience and challenges because challenges are questions related, to the challenges they face in this endeavor or the challenges of solving the problem. So these can sort of be intermingled together, blended with experience and challenges. They can kind of overlap, but you can create a storyline with this as you're flushing out what they're doing. After this come examples and stories. They allow for the guests to share, if they want, stories about their experience. I always encourage guests to share throughout. So if they have stories at any point in time in the show, I'm happy for them to share those. I also ask them, if there are stories they would like me to ask them about. So I don't necessarily keep it to this part of the show, but I always want to make sure that I ask the question, are there any stories that would fit with this? Again, because listeners resonate with stories. Asking about it, hearing about them, and definitely feel free to elaborate. So after this section, it comes the summary, which is just, what one takeaway would you like to leave for the audience? In literature and movies, it's the denouement, which is defined as the final outcome of the main dramatic complication in a literary work, according to Merriam-Webster, or the final resolution of the intricacies of a plot, as of a drama or novel, according to dictionary.com. Essentially, it's when it all comes together, and that's what this summary section does. Kind of finishing up with this is a closing. Closing is where you ask the guests to share where listeners can contact them, where they can find their business, what the final call to action will be for your guest. Overall, it's a basic narrative on how to tell a story, starting from intro and background to product and problem, experience, challenges, examples, summary, and then closing. It's not perfect, but it provides a framework for guests and listeners to follow. I encourage you, listen to other podcasts, see what stories are being told in their shows, and then apply it to your own. Thanks for joining me today. Make sure to sign up for the 200 at buildthatpodcast.com/the 200 and receive 200 words every Tuesday to move you forward with marketing and podcasting, delivered right to your inbox. Lastly, if you have questions or comments, you can find me on LinkedIn at Eric Rutherford, DM me on Twitter at rfordej, or email me at eric@straightforwardmg.com. Remember, use podcasts to grow your business and expand your influence.